Yeah, Colin mentioned I worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service, worked nearly about 38 years, and retired in 14, and then became affiliated with the garden at that time. So I'll reference some of the publications I've had over that time, some of which I've been using, of course. Some of my more significant ones I've been using the garden address for. Been really proud of that. It was a collaboration that I sought out and I got. So anyway, and what I did for the Fish and Wildlife Service, I worked in the Endangered Species Program and ran an office of about 80 to 100 people at one time. It shrunk over time, budget cuts. But anyway, glad to have retired in 14. Anyway, let me, this point right here, this is Point Lobos, and the plants you see extending into the frame are, that's Monterey cypress. So let me get with the talk and we'll go from there, and it's fairly intimate thing, so I'll just try to keep it as casual as I can, despite all the stuff I'm going to throw at you, I think. I've always had an interest in cypress, and here's a picture with me and my mother in 1953 at Point Lobos. It's the location of one of two populations of Monterey cypress, and it was obviously my first exposure. I wasn't even 2 years old. Point Lobos, a lot of people think it named after wolves or something, but actually it's Lobo Merino, or sea wolf, which is the California sea lion. So that's what the name comes from. And if you're there, you'd have no trouble hearing sea lions. They're deafening sometimes as you get down to the edge of the headlands. This area was actually another fun fact. It was subdivided for construction back in 1890 and was purchased by this Alexander McAllen. He later, his heirs sold it to the state for $631,000 in 1933. That would be about $14 million today, so they came out okay. But it is a glorious place, and I'll touch upon it a couple of times. My background, why am I interested? Well, I wrote, if you get the Jepson Manual, which is the book of plants, so to speak, that you would key out plants in the field, I wrote the cypress portion for both the 93 and the 12 version of that. And I had an interest in it, got interested in just collecting cypress and seeing cypress, and it sort of snowballed around 2000 when Bob Adams from Baylor asked me to go out and collect. And so I collected all over, and then we eventually ended up getting a publication, and then that continued, eventually resulting in a description. I described the genus Hesperocyparis along with Bob Price, so that's something I'm quite proud of. And the next thing is then some more recent papers. I started working with Dr. Randall Terry at, I'm drawing a blank, he's in Southwest Texas, I'll have to think of Southeast Texas. Anyway, and we worked with chloroplast DNA, or he did, I should say. He's the squeezer, gene squeezer. And we put out a couple of papers, one that talked about how these cypress trees have evolved and have basically marched, if you will, across the Bering Strait all the way down into Guatemala. And then in our 16 paper, that became fleshed out even more geographically, and we ended up with what we call the Macrocarpa clade. And what that means in genetic terms is those 6 species of cypress, which I'll go into later, are all linked to a common ancestor. And if you look on the map to the right, you see you'll see the orange triangles that encircle the coast and down and about the southern San Joaquin Valley. That is So we decided to do some research on that and go out and collect from 40 pre-selected groves and hike into these things. To date had been based on 1 or 2 sites for each of these species. Well, there's lots of groves, and as you can see in this picture, maybe not, those are the groves in the Macrocarpa clade, scattered in the Coast Range a lot, and then down in southern Coast Range, and in the southern Sierra Nevada. The stars represent groves that we hiked into, and I can't imagine doing it today. But I'm going to talk first about Gowan and Monterey cypress, and we're going to go in the order with which what I noticed when we had done this collecting over from 16 to 19 is I noticed that a lot of the cypress trees were being impacted by fire. And I knew exactly where they were because we had lat longs for where those populations were collected from. And if you go into Google Earth or something like that, you'll notice, or Google Maps, you'll notice, oh my God, that grove is burning. You know, and I started thinking, this isn't amazing. That you know, it's only been a couple of years and some of these groves are already burning. And climate change has really affected the genus. So these 2 species are known both from the Monterey area, both the Monterey Peninsula and Point Lobos to the south there, around Carmel Bay. And so in other words, if you look, there's the Monterey cypress there, and this is Gowan cypress there and there. While no populations have burned recently, the more inland one remains vulnerable and burned as late as 1987. Neither species is threatened by development today, but both occur in really high visitor use areas. What's interesting about the Monterey species, Monterey cypress, we'll talk about that first, is those 2 populations are all on the same body of granodiorite, which is sort of interesting. What does that mean? It probably means with sea level rise and with fires that they have shaped where these plants are today. And because Monterey cypress grows everywhere today, but it only naturally occurs in these 2 areas. The Monterey Peninsula population, as I pointed out, grows on the southwestern edge of the Monterey Peninsula. If you watch the Pebble Beach Pro-Am tournament, this would be the headlands that occur north of that, and in fact, but in the headlands north of that, I'm sorry, I got mixed up here. Within this 50-acre population, a guy back in 1929, Harry Ashland Green, counted about 10,000 trees. He was a philanthropist, a stockbroker. He noted that the residential development was threatening the trees, and because about this time, right around his eventual death, they were just, all of it was being cut up into housing. And also there was a golf course, the Cypress Point Club, which is very private, one of the most exclusive golf courses in America, also impacted this species there. But again, this is not anything new. This gets at this plant, which if you've ever been to the Monterey Peninsula and you take the 17-mile drive, you look out and here's lone cypress. It's even, if you go into Google Maps, it'll be on there. It'll show you where this is. And here's a photograph taken in 1885. Now, if you try to look for Ansel Adams photos of this tree, you won't find them, even though he lived in Carmel Highlands. And why was that? He respected too much the photographers that lived in the area and the other people. He decided that he would never photograph cypress in the Monterey area. Interesting. And then here's a picture that I took in 08, I believe. And if you look here, let me see if I get my little cursor. There it is. That is Point Lobos on the other side of Carmel Bay. This is Carmel Bay. So you can see that these These two populations are perched on these granodioritic headlands. And then, of course, I asked the question, why do they call it lone cypress when there's actually 3 out there? But that's a question for someone else to answer. But if you go there, there's actually at least 4 trees there. And another thing I came across in doing this talk is I didn't realize that since I've been there, there was a storm back in February of 19 that half of that tree was impacted by the winds and rain. There's another place that you won't find crowds because 17 Mile Drive is crowded. You're going to find lots of people there. If you're there on a weekend, it's crazy. But if you go to the Crocker Grove, which is along 17 Mile Drive, nobody stops there. It just looks like a bunch of trees. Well, it's near Cypress Point, and it's the only place I know of where you can really find mature cypress trees that have been affected by fire but didn't die. Usually cypress die in fires, and their reproduction is triggered by fire, but they'll live for hundreds of years. Oops. Then there's another thing. I worked with a historian from Monterey a couple years back, and he wanted to know more about Monterey cypress and the like, and he talked at length about this tree, the octopus tree or ram's horn tree. He finally found a postcard for it and wrote an article in the local Carmel paper. And the same guy I talked about earlier, Green, believed that this tree was probably 10,000 years old. Well, unlike cypress trees from the old world in China and around the Mediterranean, Western cypress don't live that long. This tree here, he found another stump had fallen over, and it was the same size as the octopus tree, and it only had 184 annual rings. These trees rarely exceed 500 years or 1.5 meters in diameter. Now this, again, we're going back to the Point Lobos population from where I showed where I walked with my mother, is a southerly population on the same granodiorite. These steep cliffs, I mean, they're steep, plummet into the ocean below with all the sea lions and everything else around there. Because of this similar geology, topography, and the lack of lightning strikes, I don't know if people realize, but there's very few lightning strikes that ever occur at the coastline itself. Lightnings are almost always restricted to where you get orthographic lift, and you don't get that at the ocean edge. So consequently, these areas are don't have natural ignition sources. So it's sort of a fire refuge. And another couple, you can't, I threw these in because there's so many great pictures from Point Lobos. You sort of cheat when you're there because they all look nice, at least in my humble opinion. Then we have the Gowan cypress, which is the nearby neighbor. There's a 100-acre population that's on lands that are conserved by the Pebble Beach Company, which is the one that developed all of Pebble Beach, and the Del Monte Forest Foundation. No fires have occurred here since '87. The population's in permanent open space, but it remains threatened by fires and hikers. There's all these trails that go through it. It's a nice place to visit, and you won't be crowded like you will on the 17 Mile Drive area. Then there's another population that occurs just east of the Point Lobos headlands of Gowan cypress. It's on state lands, and this 23-acre population grows on these pan soils, these really hard clays. They don't absorb water well, and so consequently they persist. But they're also in areas that are very prone to fire, and fortunately these haven't burned recently. So now let's move up the coast a little bit. Let me get a drink here. Hesperocyparis pygmaei, or Mendocino cypress, ranges for about 65 miles along the coast here. You can see it goes from about Fort Bragg down to Plantation in the Point Arena area in Sonoma County. These, we'll talk more about the populations, but they've not burned in recent memory, and I can hardly find any evidence that they have burned. And it's partly, I think, because again, this area is often very built up. There's a lot of homes in here. Though a few of the cypress stands are within state parks, the vast majority of the cypress trees are on private land and not subject to development. And here's where I get to bore you with some ecology. They occur in these things called pygmy forests. Some of their trees do, not all of their trees. And this doesn't look like a forest picture if I were to show that to you, but articles have been written about these little 1 to 2 meter tall cypress trees with these Bolander's beach pines, along with all these ericaceous shrubs that grow with them. These soils are what they call podsilized clays, and they're almost brick hard, and they're very, very poor nutrients. So consequently, it dwarfs the vegetation. And if you get just a little bit deeper soil, then you get these taller bishop pines surrounding these areas. So it's the kind of thing when you go to this part of Mendocino County, be sure to take in these. There are state parks that will show this interesting formation of these pygmy forests. And then there's this interesting article from Hans Jenny and others have talked about. There's these wave-cut terraces. As the ocean has dropped, there's been terraces that have been cutting into this slope over millennia, and you get these little pygmy forests surrounded by sandy areas with redwood trees, Douglas fir, you know, a grand fir. Anyway, and so you go from, again, you see this very hard soil, no water can penetrate it, and so consequently you end up with these dwarfed trees. But although the name is pygmy, this is a Mendocino cypress growing right here with a redwood, and they'll grow right with them. So on good soils, they have no trouble growing. Now the most widespread. Again, thus far we haven't seen many of these groves being impacted by fire since we sampled them. This is Sargent cypress, which ranges for about 400 miles, all the way from Red Mountain in northern Mendocino County, all the way down to the San Rafael Mountains in Santa Barbara County. There are numerous populations, and obviously we couldn't sample all of them, and we didn't attempt to. But this is more than most people had sampled at this point. While the other sampled size have been fire-free for decades, I'll talk about that and the Questor population, which has been burned a lot. First of all, Sargent cypress is almost entirely restricted to serpentine soils. I don't know if you're familiar with serpentine, but it's an ultramafic substrate that occurs on these, that is from rocks like peridotite and serpentinite. As they break down, these soils are almost toxic to most plants. So it creates a situation where the Sargent cypress can grow with few competitors. And it's been studied a lot because the serpentine soils that you see spread in California, where did they come from? Well, it's as plate tectonics has pushed the North American plate eastward, or westward, I should say, chunks of bottom seafloor have pushed up on it, and so you see these bodies of serpentine soils. There, as Brian Anaker said, serpentine soils are a model system for the study of plant adaptation, speciation, and species interaction. Serpentine soils is very stressful, low productivity site. And Hans Jenny, of course, coined the term of serpentine syndrome. Now, this picture to the right, this is the tallest cypress I've seen during my of this Macrocarpa clade. This tree is probably 250 feet plus tall. This is a cypress tree, and it probably, I'm guessing, is probably only 200 years old. So they grow quite fast. But this is just to give you some examples of some of the populations we studied. This is the Upper Austin Creek population. And you can see, I don't know how you would get a fire to burn through here, because they're basically all isolated, all separated, and this is the traditional red-colored rock that you get that is underneath the serpentine, that it makes up the serpentine rock. Of the one grove that did burn, and this was the type locality for Sargent cypress. And what is the type locality? That means where was the location of where the taxonomist collected the plant that then described the species from that individual plant. And that plant was collected right here in the Red Mountain population in southern Mendocino County. This was also the site of a former copper mine. And you can see how, again, I used Google Maps. I zoomed in on this, and you go in and you look at in Google Earth and say, oh, in 2017 it looks like when we were there. In 21 you can see the areas that burned right here. And then there's the Cuesta Ridge population, which obviously I've been there several times. Here's a picture I took in '96. This extensive population, which is, if you've been to San Luis Obispo, it occurs on the hill just north and slightly west of Highway 41 as you go from San Luis Obispo to Atascadero. And this is my partner in crime. This is Dr. Randall Terry, doing what we did on this trip, which was collect needles, the growing needles for further genetic work. The last fire occurred in here back in 21. It's been burned. Anyways, I didn't put the year in here. Then we have unburned populations that I can't find any record of a fire. There is this CAL FIRE maintains a database of all fire footprints that they have. And these are two populations that, to the best of my knowledge, they've never burned. This is on the left there, that's Cedar Mountain, a private property surrounded by private property, but it's serpentine, what can grow there, so nobody plants anything there. And then you have the Cypress Mountain population I mentioned earlier, and this is that one tree, as you can see, going way down into here. Now the story changes. Now we start talking about the devastation that was the fires that occurred in 2020. I guess it was 2021 or 20. I should say 20. Santa Cruz cypress is right here and occurs in 5 populations in Santa Cruz and San Mateo County. And these are the 5 populations: Bootenau Ridge, Eagle Rock, Bracken Brae, Bonnie Doon, and Majors Creek. I'll go in the order of which the groves were discovered and see what's happened to them. First, Bonnie Doon. Bonnie Doon population, again, the type locality for Santa Cruz cypress, burned in the 2008 Martin Fire. After sampling the population again in 2016, the 2020 CZU Lightning Complex Fire, which is the 12th most damaging fire ever to occur in the state of California, burned through, there was lightning strikes all over the Santa Cruz Mountains, burning groves, just out of control. Everything. Lives were like 6 people died in this fire. Anyway, when we went back in 16, they were spared. The fires did not burn the grove in 2020 either, according to everything I've seen in aerial imagery. But it's not so good for a lot of the others. Eagle Rock, and again, here's Dr. Terry down below. This is the grove in which, when we were here, we parked here and hiked out to a lookout, and from there, we collected from the various trees in here. Now, and you look in the 2020 image, it's all gone. I talked to a woman who went back and measured these, and it looks like basically the entire grove burned. The bracken bray population, this population, which in 17 it occurs right here's where I got out of the car and this picture was taken. That's where the location was, and you can see aerial imagery shows the entire thing burned. The Butno Ridge population, which is maybe a new species or at least it's a variety, the imagery here is interesting in the sense that you can tell the entire grove burned. The grove was located in here. They're gone. But then you see all these other trees. So what are these? They look like the fire swept through all of that. Well, those are redwood trees. And this grove burned redwood trees. Now, the redwood trees, fortunately, unlike cypress, can sprout from their trunk and and recover. And that's what they're doing. But you can see right here that the steep sandstone habitat here and these trees, all of this is gone now. And then the last population was just nicked a little bit, was the Majors Creek population, where this point here is right there, and you can see the fire swept up here and burned the trees and part of these. Maybe 50–60% of the grove got impacted. And then we'll talk about Paiute cypress, where I did my thesis on. These are the groves right here. It's hard to see on this map, I apologize, but the groves don't take up a lot of room, unfortunately. And this is the Back Canyon Grove, and these are Corral Creek, I should say. Anyway, these groves occur in the southern Sierra Nevada, and there's about a dozen groves total, and they occur on about 1,000 acres. The groves range from about 3,300 feet to 5,900 feet, and one population burned since it was sampled. So we had these 5 sampling locations, and this population actually burned the Cane Creek population. So let's talk about that. The Cane Creek population, which did occur along this Cane Creek right here, and then Dr. Terry again. I can't tell you the extent of the damage at this point because Google Earth hasn't updated the imagery of something, because this fire occurred in 21. But back when I was young and spry, there was a time, I hiked all over this canyon in 1981 and documented little islands of plants, within the chaparral. And these are dwarf cypress trees, mature and better right there. I also, there was an article of by Ernest Twisselman lamenting the loss of the last greenhorn, the last cypress in the Greenhorn Mountains. Obviously, my death was incorrect. It's still there. But there are 2 populations of Paiute cypress that are just doing well, and if you're ever, one of the most spectacular groves you can actually drive through is the Bodfish Grove, which occurs south of Lake Isabella. This grove is probably where I fell in love with cypress, because it's almost it's just beautiful with all these cypress trees and pines as well, and they're doing well. This area hasn't burned in recorded history. And similarly, this population, the southernmost, which is filled with pines and yucca and other things, for some reason hasn't burned. I can't explain it. Some of the other stuff, unfortunately, can be explained. Then I decided, while we were doing this, I wrote a paper in the journal Fremontia, which is now Artemisia for the California Native Plant Society. And in that article, I noticed, looking at this, the Hobo Ridge Grove looked like it had been burned. Well, I had first got into the Hobo Ridge Grove actually in '81, and there's a stand of these very old, tall cypress trees in here. Some of these I measured, and they're not giants, but they're 80 feet for cypress. That's pretty good. And then that grove, of course, unfortunately burned in the 2010 canyon fire. Well, that was very, surprising to me, because this grove, if you ever occurs in it, there's like 6 stands separate that all seem to have different situations that occurred to them as fires have swept over the grove from both sides. There's mining operations in the canyon along the Kern River and along the area to the south. Though escaping the fire, I noticed this, and I said that didn't look good. And unfortunately, I apologize, you can't really see it, but I noticed that there was a lot of adult cypress trees that were just dead, and for no reason that I could understand. So at that time, I started working with the Forest Service on studying these cypress populations, and we have a publication that'll be coming out soon. But it turns out the bark beetles and drought have killed about 1/3 of all the trees in that stand. So this didn't somehow escape fire, didn't die in a fire, but now this is really, unfortunately, having its toll on them. What's also interesting, at least to me, is what they found out is the more they looked, the more they realized that these bark beetles were in many other places. And the drought has been so bad that the lead author of our paper, Amarina Wunschel, she has now documenting the loss of giant sequoia groves. Giant sequoia trees are dying in fires now. This is something we never thought was possible because they're sort of fire resistant. They fire resistant bark, but they're so dry that they are having a problem. Anyway, then probably the poster child for bad situations with cypress was the Stormy Canyon fire, Stormy Canyon Grove, which was hit by the Stormy Canyon fire. So I hiked into this grove in 1979, and I don't know how serendipitous it would be to stand on a place and take a picture and then take a picture the same direction, but unfortunately it looks like I knew what was going to happen. But the pictures, this grove burned entirely in '90. It also burned in '24 and in '90 and in 2010. Now the significance is that last time. It's only 20 years since the grove burned that it burned again. And this is the problem. Cypress trees don't generally survive fire. The cones, they rely upon their cones being opened at the time of fire to drop their seed and germinate and bring on the next generation. It takes about 9 to 10 years for a cypress tree to even get tall enough to produce a cone. So if you have a grove that's burning in 20 years, how many seeds are you going to have there for the following fire? And that's what's really taking these groves out. When I was took this picture in, actually this picture's not 90, this picture, anyway, this picture's not, yeah, right, they were both 90, I'm sorry. This is a standing cypress tree that burned. It still was standing in '90, and what was interesting walking into that grove was I had never seen I've walked into lots of places that have burned, but I've never been in a place where the area burned so intensely hot. There were virtually no standing pines, and anything. It was all, and the ash was up to my ankles as you walked through it. And so it burned quite hot. And so obviously, if you look in the picture here from 2009, just before the recent 2010 fire, these are not cypress in here, but this shows you the cypress were over the ridge here. I don't have any way of getting a picture there. But when the area burned in 2010, you can see it just wiped everything out in this area. And now the problem is, when they went back in our study in 2019 and looked at the area, they found that there are virtually no, first of all, there's no standing dead trees. So there's no standing cypress even where the fire burned, which is highly unusual. Usually the trees remain. And there were no seedlings, except a little few along creeks. So in our paper that we will have coming out in LISO, we'll be reporting upon this. Really, it's sort of this is sort of a documentation of at least a partial extirpation of a grove. In our research that we submitted earlier this year, we're hoping that it will be published in late 23. We offer some recommendations for Paiute cypress. How can we? There's a need for future monitoring of all the non-cypress trees. They found, for example, what about the invasion of gray pine, or what about, what are they taking out, impacting the species? There's the insect attacks, the bark beetles that are attacking, and they found, this is Amarina, I'm sure you can't see it, Amarina, Wunschel, Lexi Bernal, and Sam Kaiser. They did all the field work, and they found that that the insects, the bark beetles, were virtually almost ubiquitous in certain, like the Cane Creek Grove and other groves. So as this drought is impacting, and I know, I don't know if you've been to the Sierra Nevada not too recently, but you'll see that, especially with the prior to this last wet year, lots of trees are dying up there. Lots of trees, many, and so they need to look at that, and they also need to look at non-fire-related mortality, which is just trees dying of old age, which is possible. So then we also recommended employing fire suppression tactics. The thing you'll notice in the Santa Cruz groves, you probably didn't, is what areas didn't burn in that SCZU lightning fire. They were areas near homes. They went out, that's what CAL FIRE does. That's where they target. They go in and protect the structures. They ignore the landscape, especially landscape that just seems to be a bunch of trees. That's not within human habitation. So unfortunately, what we recommend is they need to start targeting some of these populations that are particularly vulnerable, to target actual fire suppression activities there as well, instead of just letting that burn while we concentrate on protecting structures. And then also we recommend harvesting and storing seeds for future propagation, maybe reintroduction, because we hope to be documenting just how genetically different these populations may be. But anyway, so I sort of went from the pretty good news to the less good news. But it was just amazing, because it was just a serendipitous thing of, because we had all these actual long ringings. You could go and right to the site and see, well, was that burning? Is that in a fire? And I never would have been able to do that before. I'd have had to go out and revisit the site to know what happened. And with that, I don't know, hopefully you have some questions. I'm here to hopefully, if I have any answers for you. I'll see if I can give one for you. Are there any questions? Yes.
Are these bark beetles, are they native species?
Yeah, they're native.
All native.
They're all native. The ips. There's species that are, in this case, I didn't put the genus in there. It starts with a PH. My eyes glaze over with the insect names. But yeah, there is a species. There's another author that just recently published a paper in Arizona with Arizona cypress, and is pointing out in some of the national monuments out there that the bark beetles are just having their way. Again, what happens is the drought hits, it reduces the amount of phloem flow through the tree. They get weaker, and then the beetles can then bore in and cause the problems.
So are you guys working with CAL FIRE right now to implement fire suppression techniques, or have you guys tried to
My co-authors are both, well, especially Amarina. She's an ecologist with the Forest Service, so they have a relationship. We already printed a report once in which we reported a lot of these details, but yeah, we're going to need to find a way, because there is just sort of an instinct gut reaction to protect structures, and I can understand it. What do you do? But yeah, there is a need for coordination with the state and Forest Service. Did you have another question?
I have a question. You mentioned that you make recommendations. Actually, I have several questions. The recommendation, where do they go?
The recommendation is actually in the article, so it will show up in that. We've also, and plus Amarina, Dr. Winchell, she works with the Forest Service. She works with other fire personnel within the Forest Service system. But yeah, it is something that we certainly down here, we have cypress species down here that are also in really not great shape. Tacati cypress is being impacted down here. And again, it's this issue with fire. It's this repetitive fire within 20 years, 10 to 20 years after it burned, it really needs to not burn again. But we're getting such dry conditions now that isn't, they don't have any natural preventative things. And the other problem is it's all these human-induced fires. That's one of the biggest problems. You know, we are, if people are out there setting off fires, and I'll just put it this way. Naturally, fires occurred throughout this area with lightning strikes. So and before that, Indians also, Native Americans also used fire. But the issue is that really, in fact, what we've also pointed out, that I'm a believer that Native Americans greatly reduced the distribution of Western cypress in California and elsewhere. They were, I've read a lot of their books. The men and women of the tribes lit fires for different reasons. One, to open up habitat, go into, and others to allow for greater hunting access. So those were some of the problems, and those fires also caused a problem. But today it's just snowballed with the intense warming climate, along with the bark beetles, along with more ignitions occurring when normally ignitions wouldn't occur. The point I forgot to mention was, when you have ignition sources, that often occurs at least during rain events. The problem is these ignitions now are occurring like in our Santa Ana conditions. Santa Anas don't have natural ignition sources, so you almost can be 100% sure that if it's a Santa Ana condition and a fire got started, that didn't happen by accident. That didn't happen from nature. That was caused by a human-induced fire. So those things are what's really are shaping a lot of this. And unfortunately, it just gets depressing to me.
Are any of these seeds gone to the seed bank? Are they in the endangered category? You mentioned a number of species of these cypresses, but what are they in their category? Are they endangered? Are they on watch list?
Okay, the Gowan cypress is listed as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act, and appropriately so. If it starts burning, thus far, the Gowan cypress has been spared. Those two groves really haven't been impacted. The Santa Cruz cypress is listed as an endangered species that I think we were trying to reclassify as threatened. I sure hope we didn't. I say we when my old role with the Fish and Wildlife Service, because clearly fire is not done. All 5 groves burned in whole or in part since '08. That means really that those places can't burn for like 25 or 30 or 40 years minimum, and they're with all those people living around it. It's not a great situation to be in. But there's a video, I don't know if you can find it, where a cyclist went through the Santa Cruz Mountains on some trails. He went through it prior to the burn, prior to the CCU Lightning Complex fire, then went back and did the same thing. It's disgusting. Everything's gone. I mean, you go for miles and miles, and it's just open. And in the first video, he's ducking under plants and trying to get around and follow the trails on his bike. And the next one, it's just open. Doesn't have to worry about it. It's all gone. That was an amazing fire where there was literally hundreds of lightning strikes probably, that hit that area all at one time. And just, it was a horrible natural fire. Anyway, you do have another question? Or? Oh, sorry. No. Yes.
Right here in the children's garden, there's a variegated Monterey cypress. Have you seen that? And do you know where that was selected from?
I generally don't get excited about cultivated cypress, but there are there's a book I can give you the reference to that lists all the cultivars of Monterey cypress. Monterey cypress is one of those that does a lot of these sports where you get a yellow or and so they're what we cultivate, But I will say this came from your garden. This is a picture, and does anyone know what cypress that is? No, you have a Cuyamaca cypress and a what's the other one? Well, maybe someone thinks this is Monterey. This is Mexican cypress. Yeah, this occurs right near your building there, Colin. It's right across the way, and it's the most widespread planted tree all over of cypress, of western cypress all over the world. It was planted all over. It was planted so much that the people in Portugal thought it came from their country, and they call it the cedar of Gao or something. It's actually a tree that was somehow the seed got here, got to Portugal, and planted the tree there. And when we were doing an article on true cypress, I say we, Dr. Terry and I, and some other authors, we were looking at going through and identifying, because a lot of things people think are, a true cypress, funibris, or some of these other species, are really not. They're planted populations of Mexican cypress. And this, if I go back to this, okay, so this this is that's Guadalupe cypress. This is Mexican cypress. Most of this goes all the way down here. It's mixed in with another species, Bentham's cypress. Then you get up into here. This is Arizona cypress, and this is Arizona smooth cypress. Then we have Cuyamaca cypress and Tecate, and there's a couple populations of Tecate. These are the populations that we studied, the Macrocarpa clade. This is the McNabb cypress, which is a large shrub, can almost get tree-like. And then these stars are Baker's cypress, which is intermediate. If you look on the genetics thing, it's the most different. And then we have Calotropsis, which is the Alaskan yellow, Alaskan, what do they call it? It's not as, anyway, common names, easier to say the scientific name. That grows up in here, all the way into Alaska, all the way up to Bering Straits. So basically, these trees, I'll say metaphorically, march down over the Bering Straits, and then down here, all the way, as I said, to Guatemala and Nicaragua. Anyway, but yeah, that.
What's the species name of Mexican cypress?
Lusitanica. So yeah, you see there's, it should be right there, yeah, Lusitanica. And what's interesting is there were people that were still contending, oh, well, there's still these type of cypress in the old world, so that's not different. Well, they were just all planted. They've been planted everywhere. Just like when you think of Italian cypress, you think Italian cypress, they're all over Italy. Well, they're all planted in Italy. They didn't occur there naturally or natively. They occurred on the island of Cyprus and in Greece and on the very eastern Mediterranean. There's a lot. The true cypresses are truly fascinating too, but you can't study everything. But anyway, so
Well, thanks very much again, Jim.
yeah. Thank you.